It's Wednesday, and it's only about 9 in the morning, half 9, something like that. I don't know, before dinner, too early. And it's already warming up quite nicely. The inside of the house is like Satan's fucking bint. It's well hot. Oh, hang on, fingerprint. Professional camera work. Right, Pinky news or general fleet news, midweek catch-up, etc, etc. Probably won't be a long video again for a little while, because stuff. So anyway, cases empty, completely empty, absolutely immaculate inside. And this is the whole reason we're doing it, basically. Look at this. I hope it's picking this up. That can really only be got rid of with blasting, basically. We've got to try and... I'm not even going to attempt to try and get them studs out until the head's cleaned up. But yes, all the valvulations, and I'll give you a look. My little pinky. Right, that's how big the valves are. Tiny! In fact, same size as my thumb. I could have put my cock on there as well. But it's the inside of the engines. Obviously, when I took it apart, immaculate. Ignore this, because I had to go with my sandblaster the other day, and it's not even touching it. So Uncle Steve knows somebody who does vapor blasting, and extremely reasonably priced. So I think he's going to get the job of blasting the cases, and by all accounts he paints them into it as well. So yes, that's it. Nibbler, he's waiting on fork seals and an MOT, because the decision at the moment is, do I put fuel in the car or do I fart around with stuff? And it's fuel in the car. My expense to get to work now has more than doubled because of the price of fuel. And yeah, it probably wouldn't actually be that much more efficient to use the bike. If I had, when I was on a 125 and stuff like that, yeah, it's no brainer. You know, pennies to run. Unfortunately, if any of you run something like a 1000cc bike or anything like that, anything above like a 500, they don't cost pennies to run. You know, so it makes no sense to get the stuff done on Nibbler to use Nibbler. Because he's not going to cost any less. He costs about the same to run as my 2.3 Merc, which needs an MOT. But Steve's back from the TT now, and when the pennies are there, and going to be throwing some money at things, obviously. What surprised me about this restoration, and it's not going to be concourse or immaculate show winning or any balls like that. Usable state. It's got to be safe, because that's the whole reason of doing it. It needs some corrosion issues addressing before we lose it. But like I say, the inside of the engine, everything inside, the bearing shells, the lot, pretty much nowhere at all, none. And these are easy engines to set up, because they are, if you've never seen one before, I will show you now. Follow me, come round, come round, come round. It's a gear driven cam. Basically, this is the crankshaft, and it's got just a little bit of dust on it at the minute, but obviously all these are going to be thoroughly drowned in brake clean. They're clean anyway, but thoroughly, you know, cleaned before they put back in with assembly lube and all that lot. So there's oil on stuff for the first start up. But there's one of the con rods and pins. All the pistons are out because I'm cleaning those. They're carboned up, which is natural, and it wasn't too bad. It's like the valve bottom, if you look at it. That's normal. That is completely normal. If you can remember, if you are of a certain age, I can still remember cars having to have the heads taken off, you know, regularly every few years to be decoked, because this happens and they couldn't burn it off. But all this will come straight off. All this is just burnt on carbon, and it's just completely natural. when you see some of these internal videos on YouTube and all this, like you've always noticed they're always immaculate inside because they've just rebuilt the fucking thing. This is natural state. So you've got your exhaust ones there and your inlet ones there. Inlets are slightly bigger on this bike. And I've just farted. Ooh, I smell. So all these will be cleaned up. It only takes something like brake clean and a little wire brush. Your gasket scraper to get rid of this. Interesting fact of the day. Right. Base gasket. You'll notice the original one is a metal affair, obviously, and it has rubber either side of it. It has like its own sort of gasket seal already on it. That's going to be replaced. Interesting enough, the replacement ones are like the paper type, the Vestra paper type, because all that's keeping in is crank pressure. There's not a massive amount of pressure in there, so that doesn't need to be a super duper sort of gasket. But obviously the original is metal from Honda, and you can't get the metal ones anymore apparently. Not that I've done a gross amount of looking into it, because there's been some sort of legends and fallacies about these little 400 engines. The cases and everything are based on the original CBR 600, the 1987, 1986 they came out, something like that. Exactly the same cases. This is all exactly the same, but they were bored down for the 400s, obviously. And that's the water jacket around there. You know, it's been a brilliant experience just to see how this engine's put together, because it's a work of genius. But getting back to what we were getting back to, yeah, there's a gear on the crank, right? And normally you would have a cam chain running up from that, with a tensioner one side and a guide the other. Well, there's a guide on the tensioner as well, which is usually automatic, and there'll be a guide this side as well, and then you'll have your two cams on top, and you have to time that chain exactly. It has to be so many pins between each one and all this lot. It's easy to get wrong. This is piss easy. When the crank's in, you've got your ignition pickup side here, and you've got statory side here. There's timing marks on it, and you put it number one cylinder, which is, if you sit on a motorcycle, the number one cylinder is always as you sit on it. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4. Try aiming the camera at the fucking engine, Jim. Wanker. But to strip the engine down, it has to be upside down. So everything then becomes 1, 2, 3, 4 as you look at it. And that's how all this is labelled up, because when it's reassembled again, everything gets put into the top case, and then the bottom case closes it. It's going to be interesting putting the gearbox back, because the levers for moving the gears, I think they're called, I don't know what they're called, to be honest, but the fucking levers for moving the gears sit in the bottom case. They're attached into the bottom case, and there's three of them. And the middle one is actually bolts through the shaft. So it's the only tricky part of putting it back together is these two cases. There's not a gasket there usually on a Japanese bike which is horizontally split. You just put like the factory version of a gasket seal around there. There's like an assembly paste you put around. You don't put too much in, and then they're joined together. So you've got to try and get those three forks in the correct place on the gears before you fully lower the box. To be fair, the case won't shut if they're wrong, which is okay. Anyway, back to the gear-driven cam. I do get distracted quite easily. So anyway, this basically, you've got that sitting there, the crank sits there, and then you've got obviously the barrels on top which go there, and this sits in the head like that. Actually sits flush there, but this bottom gear meshes with that, and then this top gear meshes with the gears on the cams. And you see they're serrated. You're supposed to put a pin in there when you reassemble them, so all these teeth are in line. and it stops it getting out of time when you're putting it back together. But basically there's marks on these cams as well, and usually what it is when they're in there, when the cams are in there, they'll have like an arrow, and both arrows should be facing that way, with number 1 cylinder at top dead center usually. I have got the proper workshop manuals and shit for this, and that's it. That's the timing done. You know, you don't have to piss around counting teeth and all that rollicks. It's just if the cameras are in the right position and that's in the right position, it's timed. It was one of the best inventions ever. It should have been put into production on every bike ever made instead of a cam chain. The reason it's not put onto a lot of engines is all this is a lot of weight, and that's the only thing. But it's typical Honda. Look what we can do, gear driven cams, and they sound different as well. And the V4s, some of the V4s were gear driven cams. I know my little VFR, I'm sure, was gear driven cam, and I've had another gear driven cam, CBR 750, which ironically was the same engine pretty much, just bored out to 750. Let's go and have a look at the gearbox. Welcome to Satan's arsehole, otherwise known as the shed. Anyway, let me show you one of the pistons. Now I've took there's 3 rings on these pistons. There's an oil scraper ring at the bottom, which is the one that looks like a spring laid on its side, like that. Focus, you fuck. And then you've got the middle ring and the top ring. Those are immaculate, so we're going to reuse them. Oil scraper ring's good. Now this has just been in the aqua jiggler because these were black on top. I think I showed a photo of them when I just took the head off, and obviously they're carboned, but that's an hour in the aqua jiggler, 2 runs, and it's got it like that, look. But just for scale, there's your piston. So not big by bike standards, but obviously 4 of them make 400cc, or rather the ball and the stroke make the cc. But so that's one of the pistons, so that's come out nice. A blast of brake clean and shit, and you've got to get right in these grooves, make sure there's nothing in these grooves so the rings sit back right, because the piston has to be able to move a tiny bit. Right, the aqua jiggler, I'm waiting on new fluid because right, basically this is the state of the carb at the moment, and it's just road crap. That's all it is. That's just years of just grime. It's, you know, it is what it is. But after a half-an-hour session, let's just move that out of the way, and in Blue Peter style, here's one we did earlier, they're coming out like that, which is still vastly improved, but the fluid's on its way out now. I mean, it's black. I can't say black, Jim, but yeah, it's all crappy, so that's going to have to be changed. So I've got some coming. And also, when the carbs are cleaned, I'm just going to put them back together with no diaphragms in or jets, and they're going to be vapor blasted as well, and they'll come up like no. Right, so that's that. Here's the gearbox. Lower shaft there. That's the lower shaft, and you see the bearings are immaculate. I'm just going to reuse everything because there is absolutely nothing wrong. But that's the lower gear shaft. That's the one that goes out to the clutch. Clutch basket goes on there, and then this is what your drive sprocket goes on. So they're actually flipped, sort of opposite, if you like. That this goes the other way, but the engine's upside down when you're doing it, so everything's arse about face anyway. And this is the gears, and the levers, they slot into these things here, look, just there, and do that. When you're changing gear, that's what it's doing. Like, these are sliding to select different ones of these, basically. At least I think that's how it works. No, I know how it works. This is the water pump. This is the one item allegedly you cannot get anymore. You can't get them new. This is the water pump, and allegedly the O-ring that goes here, apparently you couldn't get anymore, and all this lot. And that's the O-ring that separates the oil from the outside world, basically. The water pump is driven off the oil pump. The oil pump bolts into the case, so it's the oil pump one side and it's the water pump the other. Oil pump goes clutch side. It sits behind the main clutch wheel, and then that goes the other side. Good news, everybody! I've looked on a lot of part sites, and that O-ring is still available. And the only other thing we've got to get is where the gear shaft comes out. There's a seal there, which to come out needs to be butchered. So that was butchered. And when you pull the gear change shaft out, it sort of damages that seal anyway, because they've all gone hard and horrible. So that needs replacing. So it's like a couple of quid for that O-ring, £5 for the other seal, and I'm going to get back to the shed now. Yeah, it's back in the shed. So as I was saying, the base gasket is like £5. Now obviously I'm going to need a new gasket for this. I'm going to need a new gasket for the clutch cover and a new gasket for the sump. That's going to be it. The head valve cover gasket is still in really good condition, and it will still seal well. You always put a little bit of silicone in these half moons, and that's it. That's well. But the head gasket, the one that goes on top of the barrel, between the barrel and the valves, obviously that's got to keep in combustion pressure and gases, and it needs to be able to separate those gases from the water jacket and all that lot. That's £80. That's normal. That's totally normal. And that tends to be, I've not got the old one lying around actually, but that tends to be quite a meaty little fucker. And it'll have, quite often it'll have like copper rings to go around the top of the barrels and stuff like that to seal them, and then it'll have a secondary seal between obviously the head and the water jackets and stuff like that. So yes, that's the progress so far. So yeah, that'll do. That'll be your midweek catch up. There's nothing else really. I had Rosie up on a lift the other day. I've got a mystery knock on the back end, and I think it's actually something moving in the boot because it's rock solid, absolutely rock solid underneath. I was suspecting the front end felt a little bit funny, and I was suspecting the lower arm bush had gone, and they're big fuckers like this, and they're known to fail, but both of them are solid. It looks like it's actually had some suspension work done. Turns out nearly all my tyres were like 5 psi down, because I don't check them often enough because I'm a twat. So anyway, yeah, that's cured that basically. So yeah, it was something moving around in the boot. I've got like a rock from Scotland or something moving around in the boot. So yeah, that's it. So that's the progress. Yes, that'll do. I think that'll do. So bugger off. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye. Good evening, good morning, good night.